to learn more
I
about.
have one reading this morning, and it is from the book of Matthew, from the Sermon on the Mount. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He goes on to say, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds." So today begins Diwali, which you may know. It's a holiday celebrated across India by many different people, though its origins are Hindu. In different parts of the country, different stories are told to explain this festival of light. In Western India, the celebrated story is of how Vishnu, the preserver god, banished King Bali to rule the underworld. In southern India, it celebrates the defeat of the demon Narakasura at the hands of Lord Krishna. But the story that I first learned was the story from northern India about King Rama, his wife Sita, and the defeat of the evil prince Ravana. This is the story that's told in the ancient epic, the Ramayana. In the story, Prince Rama, his wife Sita, and his brother Lakshmana are exiled from their kingdom. And while they're wandering in the forest, spending their exile, Sita gets abducted by this evil prince, Ravana. Rama then befriends the monkey king Hanuman, and together with an army of monkeys, they defeat Ravana and bring Sita home safely. And on their way back to their kingdom, Ayodhya, the people light their way with these small pots that are sort of lamps, right, old-fashioned lamps. And so the small clay pots lit on Diwali, the diya, they commemorate that triumphant return from exile and this defeat of this evil prince. That is the absolute shortest version you will ever hear of this story, which has been told many, many times and retold many times. There's a relatively new multi-part television series in India right now. All of the stories, whether from the north or the south or the west, ultimately are about the defeat of evil and the triumph of good. Right? That is what the stories of Diwali are about. And they're stories like that in every culture, every religion, all over the world. And we still tell stories like this, even now, on our TV shows, in our fiction podcasts. We tell the real life versions of those stories in documentaries. We make and remake classics, and we write and rewrite fairy tales that show good winning. And often it's really clear in these stories which is the good side, which is the side of right, the side of the righteous. While there may be nuances and redemption arcs, we aren't confused about who is good and who is bad in the Ramayana, and we aren't confused about that in Star Wars, and we aren't confused about that in A Room with a View even. In myth, drama, epic, more often than not, we know which side we're supposed to root for. And that makes sense because usually our stories are trying to teach us something. In the case of these battles between good and evil, we're learning what our culture wants us to understand about who is right and what is worth fighting for. In everyday life, it isn't actually always so clear. It's not always so obvious which is the side of good, which is the side of the righteous. There are nuances. A very long time ago, my older brother called me self-righteous. I can't have been more than like 13, and it probably was not the last time he called me that to my face or behind my back, but I'm reasonably sure the moment I remember was the first time he did because I was surprised and confused and probably defensive, and I knew from the way that it spilled out of his mouth with such disdain that whatever it was, he thought it was like really bad. And the irony, of course, was that his demeanor, as he called me this, was probably like textbook self-righteous, right? But in that moment, it forced me to think about what it meant to be self-righteous, but then also what it meant to be righteous. I'd probably encountered those words in literature and in religious story and text, but I'm not sure anyone had given me a proper definition. Self-righteous, we know, has negative valences. It means a sort of overconfidence, often unfounded, in our moral superiority. We use it to mean someone who thinks they're better, more right, more good than others, and usually it means someone who attempts to lord that over others. Righteous, on the other hand, is defined as actually morally right, actually virtuous. So self-righteous, believing oneself to be more morally right than others, which in fact then tips into being not morally right anymore, and righteous, actually being on the side of the morally good. And honestly, my brother probably wasn't wrong. At 12 and 13, I suffered from a bit of idealistic self-righteousness. It's a stage many of us go through. Whether or not you buy into theories such as Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development, if you've been around children, you know that little ones often have a strict sense of right and wrong. There's no gray in there. And as children go, they come into deeper understandings of those gray areas, but it takes time. And in spite of their own frequent need for gentleness and forgiveness and compassion, as they navigate a world they're only just beginning to understand, often it's harder for children to extend those same things to others if they perceive a wrong to have been done. As we grow, so does our capacity to see the humanity in others and to be gracious and humble when we are right and to stomach it when we are wrong, or at least in theory, that's how it goes. All of us know from our cultural and political landscape that self-righteousness is alive and well in many adults who've never quite left that stage. Now, I want to be clear that I think it's normal to want to be right, as in correct about our information. It's normal to want to see ourselves as morally good. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be good and moral and right and accurate and known as someone who can be trusted with facts and decision-making and emotion. It's okay to want to be that. And I think that there is sort of a spectrum. That's how I want to talk about it a little bit this morning. There's a spectrum. When we insist on our own goodness and rightness, even when perhaps we should admit our wrongs or our failings or our missteps, we come off as self-righteous. There's a parable in Luke 18 that goes like this. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Now, you know I don't believe in the literal truth of Scripture or in a God that condemns. And you know that I don't believe in self-castigation as a path to salvation. But that's a pretty good example of self-righteousness. These stories survive for a reason, because they have things to teach us, even if we don't share their theology. Here, the Pharisee who looks down on others, the one who pities others, who is not as enlightened or as good, that's the person who in this story ends up humbled. While the tax collector, often used as the evil character, will end up exalted because he understood how to humble himself. We can see self-righteousness as the sort of most negative expression of rightness, even if we're right? And then if we move along the spectrum, there's just like being right, and that feels nice, and we can do that well. It's possible to be right and be kind. But sometimes insisting on our rightness with vigor, even when we are right, can be ingracious, lacking in compassion. My friend and colleague, the Reverend Lee Pagzula out in Pennsylvania, recently preached about this, speaking about our American idolization of rightness. And she described a commercial that perhaps you have seen. In it, a couple is standing by a car and they're unpacking for their camping/boating trip. And one says to the other, "I'm not seeing life jackets." And the other one says, "You said you'd pack the life jackets." "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." And the accused says, "I'm gonna have to challenge that," and pulls out a challenge flag like they use in football. And then up runs this person with a laptop, and they put on the headphones and they watch the replay. We don't get to see the replay, but then the one smiles and says, "You know, my favorite part is when you said, 'Obviously I won't forget to bring the life jackets.'" And Reverend Lee mused on what it would look like if they each doubled down. If the one who was right insisted on reminding the other and rubbing it in, and if the one who got it wrong was sullen and difficult, or if, even in the face of reality played back, decided they weren't wrong, right? How would that ruin their trip? Facts matter, absolutely. Giving credit where it's due matters, absolutely. Being right is lovely, sure. But relationships also matter, and how we behave when we are right, even if our rightness is demonstrable and clear, it matters. Our compassion and kindness to others matters. Being right can swing in either direction, toward cruelty and control or toward understanding and reconciliation. And then that brings us to that other side of my proposed spectrum, being righteous. We might explain this as being right, factually, morally, spiritually, socially, without being a jerk, right? And without making our rightness the center of all things. I think for many of us, adulthood brings a desire to be righteous, even if we wouldn't necessarily use that term. And I suspect we wouldn't use that term because it's been dragged down, in part by its counterpart, self-righteous, and in part because of how folks believe it to operate in a religious context. These days, the line between righteous and self-righteous seems blurry, especially in religious groups who claim righteousness and then behave in ways that seem absolutely opposite. That word righteous conjures up images of Bible-thumping preachers, of right-wing conservatives, at this point, really of parodies of just such folks, like that show, The Righteous Gemstones. I don't know if anyone watched it. It's a very good show that captures self-righteousness and the wild hypocrisy of leaders who claim moral superiority and instead live lives of corruption and greed. So I get why that word feels weird for so many of us and why. And I get that to suggest that we want to belong among the righteous might feel a little bit like icky or not you or something. I can't but help to go back to the associations that existed before these sort of very late 20th, early 21st century, late-stage capitalist prosperity gospel, hypocritical complications to that word. I go back first to the concept of the righteous among the nations. This is a term, an old term in Judaism that means non-Jews who help Jewish people in times of danger or persecution. The Holocaust Museum in Israel, the Memorial Yad Vashem, has since the 1960s bestowed upon non-Jews the title Righteous Among the Nations, honoring altruistic work done specifically to save Jews during World War II. Among the 5 American rescuers, only 5, who've been given this honor are Waitstill and Martha Sharp, a Unitarian Universalist couple from Wellesley, Massachusetts. Waitstill was the minister of the congregation there, and the two of them spent time, beginning in 1939, in Prague and then in Southern Europe, helping intellectuals, children, and others to escape to safety. They helped found the Unitarian Service Committee, now known as the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, the organization that first used the symbol of the chalice. There is a wonderful documentary that we will likely be showing next month in November here so that we can all learn more and engage with their story, but I lift them up in this limited way this morning because that idea of righteous, that's part of the definition I want us to hang on to. People whose compassion and morality and courage led them to risk themselves for the sake of others. That was righteousness. Folks who did the right thing not for personal gain, not for recognition, not to lord it over others, but because they couldn't do anything less. And then I turn to the Sermon on the Mount, part of which we heard earlier. In it, Jesus is preaching, speaking to the folks who've gathered, teaching them about this way he believes we should live. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Those who mourn, they'll be comforted. The meek will inherit the earth. The merciful shall be shown mercy. He's preaching the idea that we are called to humility, not blustering displays of rightness and strength. We're called to gentleness, not aggression, mercy, not retribution, peace, not violence. The entirety of the Beatitudes can be read as an instruction on righteousness. Live well, live honestly, live with the wholeness of your heart, even if it means folks look down on you. Speak truth, seek beauty, know joy, show love, make that your creed, don't hide it. Light that lamp, climb up the tree, shout it out. Don't shrink away from being your whole, compassionate, gracious, forgiving, also invested in accountability self. Don't look down on others, but don't hide yourself either. And among the lines of the Beatitudes is that one, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. One way to interpret that line and others of the Beatitudes is to say, if your heart is pure, if you thirst for righteousness, God will align with you and the kingdom of heaven will be yours. You can read that as entirely about what's in your heart and in your mind and nothing to do with your behaviors. But of course, that's not how they're supposed to be read, right? Of course, that's not what Jesus' teachings in their totality say. When taken together, the teachings are exactly about behavior: healing the sick, feeding the hungry, washing the feet of others, humbling oneself not only before one's God, but before other people, treating each individual with compassion, whatever their station or profession. So in that interpretive work we are free to do as thinking, rational, poetic humans, we might say, blessed are those who hunger and thirst and work for righteousness. Blessed are those who demand a change toward righteousness. Blessed are those who seek to grow righteousness in themselves and to honor the righteousness in others, for they will be filled with awe and truth and love and joy. And that's the freedom presented by Unitarian Universalism, of course. We don't have to accept historic interpretations that are inconsistent with our understanding of this world we share and that don't lead us toward our vision of the world that might be. We don't have to agree that the word righteous only applies to people who believe this or that, or can only be applied in negative ways to those who corrupt its meaning. We can use scripture, literature, ancient myth, our own experiences, the stories we tell to find the truths that help guide our lives, that help us meet our own need, our own thirst for righteousness, and that help lead us to behaviors that bring about the triumph of good. And we have a clear vision for that good. It's a world in which each person is recognized as inherently worthy, possessed of inborn dignity. It's a world in which peace replaces violence, wealth is shared so that none go hungry or without shelter or education or meaningful pursuits. It's a world in which each person, regardless of their race or gender or sexuality, has full autonomy and a right to access the medical care and services that they need. It's a world in which differences are celebrated and false borders are removed, and all of us can live and work and grieve and dream and rejoice and just be our whole selves without fear. And that world that we seek won't be built by the self-righteous or by the right. It will be built by the righteous in its old sense, those with humility, compassion, and mercy, who can admit when they're wrong and forgive when they're wronged. It will be built by those who make truth, beauty, hope, and joy their creed, and who live by that creed every day. It will be built by those who see each and every other person as worthy of time and space and justice and reconciliation and basic human rights. It will be built by those who privilege relationships over wealth, the common good over the individual, hope over despair. It'll be built by those who seek not to glorify themselves, but to liberate and free us all, raising us all up. We want to be among those, among the righteous, among the builders. That's where we want to belong. So may it be.